Okay, guys, just wanted to make a quick video for you. If you go into Google and type in debt to the penny, you pull up this website here, and it will tell you exactly where the debt is almost up to the day. It's always one business day behind. So I'm recording this on Monday the 27th. So as of Friday's close, debt, the national debt for the United States Treasury was 36.221 trillion. And they also produce every month. They produce a monthly Treasury statement. And I figured out they're lying on this. Okay. So this is the one from 2020. If you go down here, you can see that back in 2020. Now, one thing to be clear, the fiscal year for the United States government ends on September 30th of each year. So for 2020, they took in $3.42 trillion dollars and spent 6.552 trillion. And that would give you a deficit of basically $1 trillion, 0.985 trillion. No, I'm looking at the wrong year. That was 3.132 trillion. But anyway, these numbers, what I did was I went through and I looked at the debt to the penny on September 30th, the last day of September, in all of these reports, and I can see how much they're borrowing. So, for example, in fiscal year 2019, they borrowed $1.2 trillion dollars, but in their revenues versus expense page on the monthly treasury statement, it shows that they only ran a deficit of 0.985 trillion, which is 1 trillion. So there's $200 billion that's a borrowing that's unaccounted for on the monthly treasury statements. And I looked at it over the last 6 years. They've increased borrowing by $13.948 trillion dollars, while telling the public that the deficit was 11.723, and that gives you a difference of $2.155 trillion dollars. So over the last 6 years, there's been $2.15 trillion dollars of borrowing that didn't show up in the monthly treasury statements. So they're lying about that. God only knows where that money's going or what they're doing with it. I realize that the balance in the Treasury General account can go up and it can go down, but I don't think it's changed that much over the years. Maybe they put a half trillion into it that they didn't have coming into this pandemic era. So they're lying about that. But the other thing I will point out is that I can't find it right now, but I have read in articles where the interest on the national debt is now at $1.2 trillion dollars. And if they could lock it in at today's interest rates and have that never borrow any more money, that would be the annual expense for the American uh, U.S. Treasury Department, $1.2 trillion dollars. And what they say is that when you get to 25% of tax revenues going towards interest on the debt, that's when you're pretty much Zimbabwe, Banana Republic. So in fiscal year 2024, they collected 4.91 trillion, 919 trillion. So if we're spending 1.2 trillion on interest on the national debt, that is 24.4% of all revenues coming in, going out towards taxes, or I'm sorry, interest on the national debt. The other thing I want to point out about this is, if you look at total spending, I think this is why I got my ass handed to me so many times trying to short this bubble in the stock market. If you look at where spending was prior to the pandemic, you were coming in at an average of what, $4.3 trillion dollars in annual spending. You look at it where it was the last 2 years for fiscal year 23 and 24, we're at 6.4 trillion. So spending by the U.S. Treasury Department has increased by over $2 trillion dollars a year. And so all that money that the government can borrow on U.S. Treasuries, because the dollar is the reserve currency and the world still values it, they can they can borrow money, and they're able to borrow money, and then they go create government jobs. And I think that was part of the reason they imported so many immigrants from Venezuela and Colombia and those places. The reason they brought so many people in there was to create demand for apartments, more houses. And so if Trump is really serious about cutting any of this government spending, he's going to have a disaster on his hands in terms of because as far as I know about Trump, all he cares about is the stock market. And so if they cut this spending back down to 2019 levels and take out $2 trillion of extra government spending every year, I mean, the unemployment would just go through the roof because you'd have to lay off all those government workers. We all know they don't do anything. Can't fire them even if they don't do anything, because they're so protected. But even if we were to be able to get through all that bullshit, you've still got this massive problem of a stock market crash and people mass unemployment. And then the last thing, with all these deportations he's doing, I know the conservatives are big fans of that, but if he follows through with that and keeps doing that and actually brings that population back out of the United States that came here over the last 5 years when Biden was in charge, if he can get rid of that population, um, you're probably going to have a banking crisis because, in my town, um, I would call my city where I live probably middle class. I don't think I'd call it middle upper class. There's parts of it that I would call middle lower class to even poor. But in that town, it's about 100,000. I think if you were to deport all those people, there would be so many vacancies in shopping centers where I can think of two shopping centers, three maybe, right off the top of my head, where there are, you know, grocery stores that cater to Hispanics. And I can see those shopping centers that go out of business. Well, then what's going to happen? Those shopping centers are going to land on a bank's balance sheet somewhere. And then you look at all those apartments and all those homes, and there's going to be a lot of private individuals that are landlords that own a home that they're renting. Now they're not going to have demand for that to be renters anymore. They're not going to have tenants. They're going to deport those people. So if the stock market is the most important thing to Trump, and I've always thought that it is, he's really in checkmate here. There's nothing he can do if he doesn't want that stock market coming down and having a banking crisis. Because if we have the banking crisis, and I think we're going to get it regardless of what he does, but when we get this banking crisis, you know, they're going to have to return to QE, which means a weaker dollar, and God only knows how low it can go. So I think the dollar could crash. I think it's going to be one or the two. I think we're either going to see a crash in the stock market or we're going to see a crash in the dollar. We could see a crash in both, or it's entirely possible that we don't see either one of them crash. But I think that is very, very unlikely. So anyway, that's all I got for today. 7 minutes. I'll let you go. Take care.